All right, well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. On behalf of our chairman, Charles Ramsey, and our executive director, Mike Pennington, thank you all so much for joining today's virtual orientation session for applicants and prospective grantees for the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency's 2021 Violence Intervention and Prevention Grants Program. My name is Sam Cook, and I serve as a senior project manager within the executive offices here at PCCD. And I'm also joined today by a number of my colleagues who will be supporting today's webinar, including members of our executive program and fiscal staff. Before we begin, just wanted to cover a few housekeeping rules and a couple of reminders. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with participants via email as soon as it's available. We do encourage you to check your audio settings to make sure you're able to hear today's presentation using your computer or other device. Worth noting that we cannot hear you. However, you will be able to submit questions through the Q&A feature in the live event section. Questions that are submitted through this feature will not be immediately visible to all participants, but rest assured that they will be received and reviewed by PCCD staff. We are planning to allot approximately 15 to 20 minutes at the end of this webinar to answer any questions that have been submitted by participants through the Q&A feature. And to the extent possible, any questions that we are not able to address in today's webinar will be answered through follow-up communications and guidance via email. And again, a copy of today's PowerPoint slides will also be emailed to participants. Moving towards the rest of our agenda, we'll provide a brief overview of PCCD, including the agency's mission and programs. Then we'll provide an overview of the 2021 Violence Intervention and Prevention, or VIP, grants funding announcement. I'll then turn things over to my colleague Heather Hewitt, who will be providing an overview of PCCD's e-grant system, which will be used to develop and submit your organization's formal application for funding. This overview will include important information about the registration process for individual users, as well as organizations and agencies, among other components. Next, we'll review some application next steps, including a summary of the funding timeline, some action steps and application homework or tips for organizations going through this process, as well as a review of what expenses are and are not allowed within our fiscal year 2021 VIP grant program. And finally, as we noted before, we will be reserving 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions you have. So please, again, don't hesitate to submit those through the Q&A feature using the sort of double question mark chat bubble feature at the top. So with that roadmap ahead of us, we will go ahead and get started. So first, just a few things about PCCD. Our agency serves as the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policy Making Agency. We were established in 1978, and our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, as well as to increase the safety of our communities. We're a relatively small state agency housed within the executive office with approximately 100 employees working across 4 offices and underlying units who facilitate the work of 6 advisory committees, the School Safety and Security Committee, and 2 training boards, as well as implement actions taken by our commission. As you can see on this slide, PCCD's responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims' compensation, and training, among other responsibilities. PCCD administers a number of state and federal funding streams and provides grants supporting best practices and innovation at the state and local levels. These are mainly focused on criminal and juvenile justice and related systems, victim services, prevention, and public safety. In recent years, PCCD has also administered state funding streams focused on school safety and security, as well as the nonprofit security grant program, as some additional examples of our work. PCCD also provides technical assistance for a variety of programs and initiatives, as well as providing statewide statistical and analytical services for criminal justice and public safety data, producing resources ranging from digital dashboards, statewide surveys, among other project areas. The agency is also specifically tasked with providing services to victims of crime and is responsible for administration of the state's Crime Victims Compensation Fund, as well as child advocacy centers. And PCCD is also responsible for coordinating training for sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, and constables, county probation officers, as well as other justice-related stakeholders. We would welcome you to learn more about PCCD and our programs, resources, and initiatives by visiting our website at pccd.pa.gov. And we also encourage folks to take a look at our strategic framework and annual reports, which outline some of the agency's overarching goals and priorities, as well as initiatives. So on June 30th, the state budget allocated $30 million to PCCD for violence intervention and prevention. In response to these new resources, PCCD staff and members of the School Safety and Security Committee quickly moved to develop and adopt a VIP funding plan that utilized a multi-pronged approach to the administration of these new dollars. The plan involved using a portion of VIP funding to immediately supplement and support additional applications received through PCCD's 2021 Gun Violence Reduction Program, and to augment current existing gun violence reduction grantees whose programs had demonstrated progress. The remaining $24 million was slated to be distributed as grants or technical assistance through a new VIP funding announcement that was released on September 3rd, 2021. So as noted on this slide, the primary purpose of VIP funding is intended to support effective local intervening and preventative measures to stop gun and group-related violence in communities experiencing high rates of violent crime within the Commonwealth. So we wanted to walk folks through the timeline of these a little bit further, just because there have been some exciting developments with this funding stream over the last couple of months. So as you're likely aware, on December 1st, 2021, PCCD School Safety and Security Committee approved a first round of 40 VIP projects totaling up to $15.7 million. And just last month, the governor and members of the General Assembly announced an additional $15 million in Federal American Rescue Plan, or ARP, funds to augment the fiscal year 2021 VIP grant program, which increased the amount of dollars that were available to make round 2 VIP awards. On January 26, 2022, the School Safety and Security Committee approved a second round of 25 VIP projects totaling approximately $23 million. That's all of you. So applicants selected in the second round are now being asked to complete a formal application in eGrants. So in addition to today's orientation session and training, PCCD staff will also be available really at any time to provide technical support, assistance, answer any questions, walk you through different components of the application if you have any questions or issues as you're going through that formal eGrants application process. So before we dive into the eGrant system and the application process, we just wanted to provide a quick refresher on some components of the VIP funding announcement, just to make sure that folks are kind of on the same page in terms of what you can kind of ask for. So eligible applicants were identified in fiscal code language and included community-based organizations and nonprofits, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorneys' offices. Eligible applicants could request their maximum budget amount, depending on their eligible category, between $50,000 and $2 million to support project activities over a 2-year period. There was no match requirement, and PCCD does reserve the right to determine final budgets as part of the final application process. So grants and technical assistance supported with VIP funds are to align with the list of eligible activities designed to reduce community violence included in Section 1306B, subsection J, subsection 22 of the Public School Code. In addition, the VIP work group endorsed additional models and approaches aligned with these eligible activities and programs that supported VIP's goal of reducing gun and group violence in the Commonwealth, which are listed here. As you may recall, applicants were asked to identify what model type most closely aligned with their project's description within the initial funding request form in SurveyMonkey. So we appreciate everyone doing that. So we've walked through kind of the timeline of funding and what different decision points have been from a committee and an agency perspective. This slide shows the initial funding request and application review process and how that has played out and sort of how we've gotten to where we are today. So you can see that the initial request form opened on September 3rd. It closed on October 15th. PCCD received an overwhelming response to this solicitation, close to 340 organizations requesting almost $170 million. So a very competitive application process. In November, our team spent time reviewing those applications, working with a team of external reviewers and internal reviewers to go through those proposals. And we made some initial recommendations for a first round of funding, again, for approval at the School Safety and Security Committee's December 1st meeting. A second round of VIP projects was presented for approval by the committee in January. And so that gets us to our formal eGrants application and orientation phase, which is that first box that's shaded in dark blue. So as you are aware, the eGrants application opened on January 27th and will close on February 22nd. So that's a Tuesday. Virtual orientation session, that's what's happening today, so February 9th. And again, as we've mentioned before, just can't reiterate enough that PCCD staff are absolutely available to provide technical support and assistance and help you out on your eGrants journey. After you guys submit your formal applications in eGrants by the 22nd, the next step will be PCCD staff reviewing those applications that are submitted, both from a fiscal and a program lens. And then we will also be working to schedule initial onboarding meetings with your program and fiscal staff for each applicant and grantee as you start your projects. Just a quick note on the project period for awards. The awards for the second round of VIP grants are bumped back slightly from the first round, recognizing that we made announcement a little bit later. So the project period for round 2 projects will be February 1st, 2022 through January 31st, 2024. And the first quarterly program and fiscal reports will be due April 20th of this year. And just before we move into the eGrants portion of our presentation, I did want to note that as your sort of initial recommendation emails suggested, final recommendation of projects will be made following the receipt and review of applications in our eGrants system. PCCD may require programmatic modifications from what was proposed in the initial funding request. And we do reserve the right to make final budget determinations and modifications as part of this process. And we also want to note that an invitation to submit an application in eGrants does not necessarily guarantee an applicant will be funded. We certainly recommended these projects and they've been conditionally approved, but it's not a guarantee until an award letter is in hand. In addition, PCCD is not liable for any costs incurred prior to the start date of the award. And just a reminder that over the course of your grant recipients will be required to submit financial reports in PCCD's eGrant system, and PCCD will reimburse grantees for reported eligible expenditures. We can certainly talk about this further if there's interest. We recognize that grantees may not have enough cash on hand to be able to purchase more expensive items or services on a reimbursement basis. So we can certainly work with grantees in those situations to provide options for getting funding in a timely manner. So with all of that being said, I am very pleased to now turn things over to my colleague, Heather Hewitt, who will be offering up an overview of how to register in PCCD's eGrants system, as well as accessing and completing your eGrants application. So Heather, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody. The first step in the eGrants registration process is to complete the agency registration form. Sam, if you'd hit the next page, please. Thank you. So the agency registration request form is what is going to get your agency registered in eGrants so that you can begin an application under the agency. From the PCCD homepage, there is an eGrants icon where you can find a lot of the materials that we will mention today. So that's a good place to start to familiarize yourself with the eGrants processes. But your agency must be properly registered in eGrants if you intend to apply for a grant. And the form that is linked on this page here can be returned to the email address that is found at the bottom. Next page. Once the agency is registered, individual users must register, and there are a few types of users which are listed on this slide. The backbone of eGrants is Keystone login. So if you have a Keystone login already established, that's what you would use to register in eGrants. There is a guide, a registration guide on our website that will walk you through any scenario that you'd see on the screen here. Next slide. And here is the Keystone user registration walkthrough link. Again, you can find this on our webpage under the funding icon under the School Safety and Security Application and Administration Guides. There's also step-by-step guides to every aspect of the application at this location on our website. Next slide. So once you're registered, you will complete the new user role request form. And this form establishes the roles necessary for you to access your grant application. So if you go in and you create a new application under your agency, but you don't have these roles, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to really get anywhere on the application process. There are, and again, the form is linked here, again, through our homepage, the eGrants icon, and you can return that form to the email address on the screen. Next slide. And there are 6 unique roles which are listed here on the screen. The financial creator and the program creator are 2 of the most important roles because that's going to allow you to actually create the content that you need to do the main application, fiscal reports, that kind of thing. The 2 reader roles are just like a read as Word document. You can read things, you can review things, you just can't make edits. And then the submission role is important because that person or that role is actually able to submit the reports and the applications and the like. And then the final role is a user manager who approves requests and maintains existing security for users who are already established under their agency. And this role can be requested on the new user role request form, which was referenced on the page before. And when you register your agency, there is a section that asks for a contact person, and I believe that our eGrants help desk is giving that person the user manager role right off the bat now. Another important thing to keep in mind is there must be 2 users registered and associated with every agency in order to move forward in the application process. Next slide. There we go. Next slide. And again, every agency should have the user manager role. They approve the request, they maintain existing security, so you can manage your users all within eGrants. And there is a user manager help guide available on our website that walks you through the different things that user manager can do. Next slide. All right, that wraps up the eGrants section of the application, or registering process. So I will turn it over to Chris for some additional information.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. In order to eventually receive grant payments from PCCD, your agency must be registered as a vendor in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's vendor management system, which is a separate system from eGrants. Now, if you know your agency is registered in the vendor system and your agency has a vendor number, then you obviously don't have to register again, and you're done with this part of setting up your agency to receive payments. If you are unsure or know your agency does not have a vendor number, you will want to go to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's vendor registration page, which is linked on this page of the presentation here in the PowerPoint. Once you navigate to that web page, you will see links for 4 different types of vendors. You will want to click the link titled Non-Procurement Vendor. You will want to have your employer identification number handy, as you will be required to enter that number in the system. After entering your agency's EIN, the system will tell you if your agency already has a vendor number assigned to it. If there is no vendor number assigned to your agency, you'll be presented with a page to enter your agency's information, such as agency name, address, contact information, so that your agency can be assigned a vendor number. If a vendor number already exists for the EIN you entered, the system will tell you that and ask you to enter that vendor number in the system. If you don't know your vendor number, you can just reach out to us and we'll be happy to assist in getting that number for you, so you can continue. Finally, you should have your banking information available for the account where you would want grant payments deposited. You'll want to establish these banking details at the time of registration, because PCCD will eventually, when we go to make payments, we will make those payments via direct deposits to the account that you establish, to the bank, the checking account you establish during this registration process. As far as registering as a vendor, I think that wraps it up. And as always, if you have questions about the process, we'll be happy to help if you want to reach out during that process. Sam, I think that covers it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks so much, Heather. And as a reminder, if any of that you had any questions as either Heather or Chris are talking, please don't hesitate to enter your questions in the Q&A feature. So now we're going to move into a little bit of information on what's included in the VIP eGrants application. So just a reminder that, again, the faster you're able to complete and submit your formal application in eGrants, the sooner that we'll be able to review and finalize awards, and the sooner that you'll be able to get those projects started. So the first section that you'll be asked to complete is an executive summary. So our recommendation for that section is that all applicants should fill out the following, like the script that's included in that section in eGrants, using those prompts. And you'll probably notice that it looks very similar to the question that we asked on question 15 of the SurveyMonkey form. So you may want to just copy and paste what you provided previously into that section. If you need a copy of your initial funding request that you submitted in SurveyMonkey, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'd be happy to provide that to you. The next important section in the eGrants application is the budget detail section. So this is where you're going to be identifying what the funds will be used for, what line items are going to be included, and all sorts of different budgeted costs. So in this section, you should make sure that your calculations are clear and entered in the format that's required in the eGrant system. And just in terms of kind of comparing to the initial funding request, you should make sure that whatever you're putting in the eGrants budget detail section is consistent with the expenses and activities that your organization included in its initial funding request form that was submitted via SurveyMonkey. So you can learn more about completing the budget detail section in eGrants by checking out the budget detail walkthrough that is referenced on this slide. And again, we'll send out links and a copy of this PowerPoint so you can kind of click through and see these resources. But that walkthrough does provide a good step-by-step, particularly if it's your first time doing this type of budget prep in eGrants. The next area is the project narrative. So this section is broken down into a couple of subsections. The first is asking you to identify your project goal and expected outcomes. So this description should provide an overview of the project, the overall goal of the project, as well as any measurable achievements that will be associated with your funded project. You should essentially describe what will change or be different as a result of your project activities in the short, mid, and longer term. So this section also asks you to identify project locations, so where your project activities will primarily take place, target populations and referral processes, the project implementation plan. So what are the specific steps you'll take to implement the project, and breaking down specific activities and timeframes, as well as the people who will be responsible for those different activities, essentially for the full length of the project. So the first 3 months, 3 to 6 months in, 6 to 12 months in, etc. So you should be sure to describe in these sections the key individuals, whether that's staff, consultants, contractors, project partners, volunteers, whoever that may be, anyone who's involved in any of those project activities, and detailing what their responsibilities in the implementation of the program will look like. The next section is performance measures. So as part of the VIP grant program, all applicants are expected to be able to report out on the pre-selected performance measures that are included and detailed in eGrants. Projects are going to be expected to report quarterly on those performance measures via the eGrant system, and those include the total number of individuals served, reached, or engaged by the program during the reporting period, the number of individuals served by demographic information as you have that available. So for instance, sex or gender, age, race, ethnicity, etc. The number of participants successfully completing the program as defined by your own program's standards, the number of trainings conducted for community and or stakeholder groups, number of MOUs or formal agreements established with partners, as well as the number of meetings and events with community members, stakeholders, and other partners over the course of the project. So our staff will be providing a list of additional performance measures that are model or program specific that will be assigned to your grant in eGrants following the initial application submission. And just a note that if you are thinking about those performance indicators or looking at them and saying, well, there's other things that we'd like to measure or capture and report on, award recipients are certainly encouraged to develop additional performance measures that are specifically related to the activities that you are proposing to do, and you can add those into the performance indicator section as well. So that's performance indicators. Our next section is the nonprofit agency checklist. So if you are a nonprofit agency, this section is going to be super important for you to complete. So you're going to need to attach a couple of documents in conjunction with the submission of your application for direct funding of nonprofit agencies. And more information about this process is included in our applicant's manual. This information, it's probably obvious, but just to clarify, it doesn't need to be submitted to PCCD for governmental applicants. This is just for nonprofit agencies receiving a VIP award. So those documents that I mentioned are going to be a copy of your most recently audited financial report, a copy of your most recently submitted Form 990, and then a list of the members of your board of directors, including each board member's position, profession or employment, community activity, and other pertinent information. We'll also ask you to upload a copy of the Articles of Incorporation, a copy of your organization's bylaws, your IRS determination letter, a copy of meeting minutes from prior board meetings, and evidence that the project director, financial officer, and board officers and any employee responsible for the receipt and expenditure of funds are included in an employee dishonesty insurance policy. And then last but not least, a written statement around the structure of the checking accounts for sub-grant funds. So again, if you have any questions while you're going through that section of the eGrants application, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can certainly help you through it. Your fiscal staff assigned to your grant are going to be really sort of your primary points of contact for that. But if you have any other questions, let us know. And then the last piece that's on this slide that you'll need to complete is going to be your required signed documents. So those will be your signature page. And just, as we sort of go through these sections quite quickly, we do strongly encourage you to carefully review even before you get into eGrants to start your application. Take a look at that VIP Round 2 funding announcement that was shared with you all on January 27th, that PDF document, which outlines all of these questions that I just rattled through and can be a really helpful guide as you begin to prepare your responses. So a couple of action steps. So first, make sure that your organization is registered as a vendor. Second, you should take steps, if you haven't already done so, to register in eGrants so that you are ready to begin building and submitting your formal application by the 22nd. And then you should keep an eye out for an email from PCCD staff to schedule an onboarding call with the program and fiscal staff who have been assigned to your project. Those calls will likely take place in March and April. called this application homework, so some things to start doing if you haven't already. We certainly encourage folks to begin developing a budget detail and project narrative that explains in greater detail than your initial funding request how you will utilize violence intervention and prevention grant program funds. Again, as a reminder, really stick closely or as closely as you can to the proposed budget that you included in your initial request. Certainly, if there's changes that you need to make, feel free to flag those and we can certainly talk those through. But generally speaking, we're looking for the substance and the content of your formal application to look very similar to the information that was reviewed and approved by the committee. We'd also encourage you to review the performance indicators in eGrants. Again, the funding announcement summary has those as well. Start thinking about any other potential data that you might want to include moving forward. And then certainly, please, respond in a timely manner to any requests for additional information that PCCD staff may send you along the way. So just as a refresher in terms of the activities and expenses that can be supported with grant funding, this slide shows the ones that can be supported. So just as a reminder, funds can be supported or funds can be used to support rather expenses associated with direct project activities and program implementation. These can include salaries and benefits for personnel. That can include overtime, expenses associated with contractors or consultants, facilitating referrals to community-based service providers and programs, including expenses like incentives or stipends for participants, obviously within reason, supplies and equipment, training, technical assistance for program model implementation, for instance, training for staff and consultants, funds to establish data collection and reporting protocols, etc. And it can also be used to cover related business and administrative functions if needed. Travel and transportation expenses are also okay, including vehicle leases. A note that indirect costs are allowable, but cannot exceed 10% of your total project budget. And again, any other activities that are necessary to meet the needs of programs and participants. And as we've said before, PCCD does reserve the right to have approved applicants remove or reduce items from the proposed budget that are deemed either ineligible or not sufficiently related to the project, and does have approval of all final budgets. So that was the what you can do. This is the what you can't do slide. So as a reminder, VIP funds cannot be used to support physical security or infrastructure costs. We also can't support costs exceeding indirect costs exceeding 10% of the total project budget. Research and evaluation costs, I think that may have been a carryover from a prior one. They're not explicitly prohibited, but we will look at those a little bit more carefully just to make sure that they're reasonable through the program. We certainly can't support construction costs, land acquisition costs, lobbying and political contributions, vehicle purchases. A reminder, vehicle leases are okay, but purchases are not. And then last but not least, honoraria or bonuses. So of course, if you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out and we can certainly assist you with how to capture your proposed activities in the budget detail section of eGrants. And again, our fiscal staff is really a great resource and can help walk you through those requirements and help you navigate that process. So before we open up for questions, just a few reminders. The eGrants application window opened January 27th. It will close February 22nd. You do need to be registered in eGrants as an organization and users to access and submit an application. An invitation to submit an application in eGrants does not guarantee a project will be funded. Awards are not final until receipt of a formal award letter from PCCD. Our applications will be reviewed on a rolling basis by our team, which means the sooner that you respond to any fiscal or program concerns, the quicker that we can process and make final award determinations. PCCD, again, is not liable for costs incurred prior to the official start date of the award. And again, organizations may only request reimbursement for expenditures that are approved in their final budgets. So with that, we'd like to open up for questions from participants. I know we've already received several. So again, if you haven't already submitted one, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. We are monitoring those incoming questions, and we'll answer as many as we can over the next couple of minutes. And again, if there are any questions that we aren't able to get to or fully address during today's session, we will certainly follow up either individually or to the group via additional communications or guidance via email. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Alyssa Sobczynski, who will be facilitating and going through the questions that have been submitted so far. So Alyssa, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. So we got a couple of pretty good questions so far. So I'll read some of those for our team to answer. This is an eGrants related question. So Heather, this individual said that their organization under the drop-down screen for financial officer doesn't include the name of one of their individuals that are on their organization, but they do have access to eGrants for another grant. How would they get that person's name to appear on this one?
So if they contact the eGrants help desk, they will be able to double check if that user has the appropriate access that they need. Sometimes it's a matter of they have access to one grant but not another one under the same agency. So yep, I would just contact the help desk, which I think the contact information was listed in the funding announcement and I believe in this session.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is also related to eGrants. So if they are already registered for round 1, do they need to redo that process?
No, you would not have to redo the process, and the only difference there would be if it happens to be under a different organization, then that new, the second organization, you would have to have access to that one as well. But if it's the same organization, the same user, then you're good to get started.
Awesome. And then another follow-up to that one, people who are in eGrants and they're assigned a role, are they able to have more than one role?
Yes, so there can be any number of user managers, program creators, or financial creators, submissions. So yes, there is no limit to the number of roles. Now, once you do get into the application itself, there are 3 contacts listed on the application. Those can only have 2 of them can be the same, and the third one does have to be a different person, which is why we require having 2 people registered. But the roles, the background roles, the security roles, yeah, there's no limit to how many you have of those.
Awesome, thank you. The next question, I think we'll go to Chris. Is it recommended that they submit a logic model to detail the goals and objectives?
I actually think that one might be me, unless Chris has thoughts on logic models that he wants to share.
I'll let you handle that one, Sam.
Okay. Certainly don't discourage anyone from developing a logic model if that's your inclination. We did set up the project narrative section in eGrants to be fairly straightforward, so you don't need to develop one by any means, but you will just need to be fairly specific about the goals of your project, just essentially getting down to what you hope to see change at a local level based on the activities that you're undertaking. Many of you did this pretty clearly in your initial funding request. So again, our goal here is really to just expand upon what you already submitted first go around and just kind of put a little bit more meat to those bones in this formal application. We do, I think, want to see a little bit of more specificity, in kind of who's doing what and when, and certainly where your project activities will be taking place. So in addition to the goals and objectives, those would be some areas that I encourage folks, if you can't kind of adequately describe it within those sections in eGrants, any attachments you have or any of those types of things would certainly be welcomed. That is something that you can use in eGrants.
Perfect. And another question for you, Sam. Does the violence prevention activities have to be specific to adult populations?
I'm sorry, you cut out for me.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Does the violence prevention activities have to be specific to adult populations?
No, they do not. So in fact, you could say youth, adults, specific age ranges. You'll notice that for some of the performance indicators, we have some standard age groupings, but feel free to specify, for whichever populations you're surveying, what those demographics look like. It can be both youth and adults.
Okay, great. And all of the round two people for their official start dates, is it still February 1st, or will it depend on the issuance of the award letter?
Yeah, so February 1st is the earliest you could request reimbursement for activities once you get your award letter. We certainly recognize that depending on kind of how the application process goes and when you officially get your award letter, there may need to be some adjustments either on the front or the back end in terms of project timeframes. I'm going to let Chris, if he's okay, kind of walking folks through what that process will look like on the back end. Again, February 1st is kind of our target for these projects, but there are some options I think that we could utilize if that becomes a challenge for anyone.
Yeah, and really, Sam, I would just add to that, you probably want to keep your start date February 1. So you can, as Sam mentioned, charge costs back to that date. But on the back end, as Sam mentioned, we would have some options at that point, probably to possibly extend some of the project end dates if in fact your project did get started, maybe a month later than you had originally planned. We may have the ability to extend the end date when that time comes about. You actually see how much, if any, money is still available to continue project implementation after your initial end date is established.
Perfect. And then another question for you, Chris, from the fiscal end. Is it okay if they make changes to their budget amounts that are a little bit different than what they had initially put into SurveyMonkey?
Well, again, as Sam mentioned through the presentation, we will be working with applicants to on their submitted budgets. They cannot budgets cannot exceed what the initial request was. If they need to make changes to individual line items, we're going to review them to make sure that the budget that's submitted in eGrants is consistent with the initial request that was submitted in SurveyMonkey, and that all costs are reasonable and justified and correlate to the project they're implementing. So yeah, changes are allowed, but as I mentioned, you certainly at this point cannot exceed your initial request.
Okay. And then I guess kind of a follow-up, if people don't have their job descriptions fully outlined, or they haven't identified all of their third-party contractors, will that be a problem?
No, we can work with applicants on those types of things. If vendors are not identified or even job descriptions are not fully flushed out at that point, we can still go ahead and make an official award and then just condition that funding for those particular positions or vendors is conditioned upon the applicant submitting a project modification request or more detail prior to us making a payment for those costs.
Okay. And then we have about one more question. So if you have any other questions, feel free to put those in there. These have been super helpful. Our last question that I have currently, Heather, this would be for you. So in eGrants, does every vendor have to have 2 user managers?
It's not 2 user managers, it's just 2 users. So you would have 2 separate registrations with your own username and login. The user manager, you could both be a user manager, just one of you could be a user manager. That's really up to you and your agency.
Okay, and we did get another question. So again, this is fiscally related. So what's the average turnaround time between submitting an invoice and receiving the payments?
So what that looks like is grantees will submit a financial report in our eGrant system, which goes to the identified financial contact, which will be your financial contact for the project throughout the life of the project. They will get a notification in eGrants, review the report, and as soon as they review that report, as long as everything, the details sufficient and they approve it, they will generate a payment that day. The payment then usually takes approximately 30 days to make its way through the treasury to eventually be deposited. If that timeline is not acceptable or you need a quicker turnaround, we do have some options to turn it around a little quicker, but in general, it's 30 days from the time we generate a payment.
Okay, great. And then one follow-up question, what if they don't have an audit?
If you don't have an audit, if you would just make a note of that in your application upon submission, and then the financial staff, our financial review staff that is assigned to your project will be in contact with you about other options that we would have, to satisfy that portion of the review.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Oh, it looks like we got another question. If they need to change their budget on their grant based on recent changes to the program, who is it best to discuss that with?
I would say if you could submit that, actually we can talk outside of this presentation regarding what changes you need to make. Sam, I don't know if you have the executive office email address. I think on the next slide, I would suggest, there you go. I would suggest emailing that, and then we can review it and get back to you regarding that.
Yep, agreed.
Perfect. So at this time, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. I mean, I can give it a couple more seconds for you guys to put any other questions, but otherwise, I think that's everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Alyssa. We have reached the end of our webinar, but obviously if you have more questions, feel free to use the contact information on this slide as your guide. I did put the eGrant System Help Desk email information and phone number in the chat. And it's here on this slide as well. So as Heather mentioned, if you have any issues, you're running into challenges, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team via that help desk tool. We will certainly continue to provide updates to you all via email, and we'll also be publishing resources to our gun violence grants and funding webpage. And that will include a copy of the webinar recording as well as PowerPoint slides from today's session. So be on the lookout for that. And then also encourage you again to check out the application and grant guides. Take a look at those as a resource. And again, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. The executive office email is there. Always happy to help and make sure you get directed to the right folks on our team to answer your questions. So with that, want to thank you for the work that you're doing. We're very excited to work with each of you in the months and years ahead. Good luck on the application process. And if you do need anything, again, please don't hesitate to reach out. But I hope everyone has a good rest of the afternoon. Thanks so much.